Imagine a man standing alone under a sky full of stars, listening to a voice, a promise that would change the course of history. A voice telling him that his descendants would outnumber those very stars. But how? He was old, his wife was barren, and the future seemed impossible. This is the story of Abraham, a man who dared to believe the unbelievable, whose faith would make him the father of nations, but not without unimaginable trials. Abraham's journey begins in a world of idols and uncertainty. Born Abram in the ancient city of Ur, he was just an ordinary man until God called him to leave everything behind, his home, his family, his security, and step into the unknown. Why would God ask such a thing? And why him? The answer would unfold in ways no one could predict, testing Abraham's faith in the most heartbreaking ways. Then there was Sarah, his wife, beautiful, strong, but carrying the shame of barrenness in a culture where children meant legacy. Every whispered rumor, every sideways glance was a reminder of what she lacked. Yet God's promise hung in the air. You will have a son. Years passed. Doubt crept in. Sarah laughed. Could it really happen? Or was this just a cruel joke? But the stakes were higher than just one family. God wasn't just building a man's legacy. He was setting the stage for nations, kings, and a covenant that would echo through time. Abraham's faith would be pushed to the brink. Would he trust God even when the promise seemed broken? Would he hold on when everything screamed to let go? And then came the ultimate test. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and sacrifice him. The words must have felt like a knife to the heart. After waiting decades for this child, how could God ask for him back? What kind of faith survives that? This is more than an ancient story. It's about trust, sacrifice, and the cost of destiny. Abraham's choices would shape the future of Israel, Christianity, and Islam, making him one of the most pivotal figures in history. But his journey was far from easy, and the hardest moments were yet to come. To understand Abraham's impossible journey, we have to go back to where it all began. Ur of the Chaldeans, a bustling city of wealth, gods, and traditions. This was home for Abram, a place where his family worshipped the moon god, Nana, like everyone else. But one day everything changed. A voice, clear, undeniable, spoke to him, saying, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." No map, no details, just a command and a staggering promise. I will make you into a great nation. Think about that for a moment. Abram was 75 years old. His wife Sarai was well past childbearing age, and yet against all logic, they packed up their lives and stepped into the wilderness. Why? Because something in that divine call stirred a faith deeper than fear. But faith doesn't mean the road is easy, the land God led them to. It was already occupied. Canaanites, fierce tribes, and rival kings ruled there. So where was this great nation supposed to come from? Then came the famine. The promised land turned barren, forcing Abram and Sarai to flee to Egypt, a decision that nearly cost Sarai everything. Fear made Abram lie, telling Pharaoh she was his sister, not his wife. The result? She was taken into Pharaoh's palace. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a crisis of faith. Had God brought them this far only to fail? Yet, in a shocking twist, disaster was averted. Pharaoh, struck by plagues, sent them away with riches. But the question lingered. Had Abram's lack of trust almost ruined everything? Back in Canaan, tensions flared. Abram's herdsmen and his nephew Lot's men fought over land. Instead of letting conflict destroy them, Abram did something unheard of. He let Lot choose first. "If you go left, I'll go right," he said. Lot picked the lush Jordan Valley, leaving Abram with the rougher hills. A bad deal? Not in God's eyes, because right after the voice returned, "Look around. All this land will be yours, forever." But time kept passing. No son, no heir. Sarai's hope withered, and in desperation, she gave Abram her servant, Hagar, to bear a child. Ishmael was born, but this wasn't the promised son. Family strife exploded. Hagar despised Sarai. Sarai blamed Abram, and God stayed silent for years. Then when Abram was 99, God spoke again. You will be the father of many nations. He even changed their names. Abram became Abraham. Sarai became Sarah, sealing the covenant. But Abraham laughed. A son from Sarah at our age? And yet God insisted. The promise was real, but so was the waiting. And the greatest test of all was still to come. Because faith isn't truly proven until it's all you have left. What would happen when God asked for the unthinkable? The air was thick with tension in Abraham's camp. For years he had clung to God's promise. A son, an heir, a legacy. But Sarah's barrenness seemed like an unbreakable curse. Then came the day when 3 mysterious visitors appeared at his tent. Strangers, yet Abraham treated them like kings, serving them the finest food. And then one of them spoke words that made Sarah's heart stop. This time next year, Sarah will have a son. Hidden behind the tent flap, Sarah laughed. Not joy, but bitter disbelief. After all this time, now? The visitor's response cut deep. Is anything too hard for the Lord? But before joy could take root, disaster struck. God revealed his plan to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities where Abraham's nephew Lot now lived. Abraham's heart raced. Would God spare the righteous? In a bold moment, he pleaded, bargaining with the divine. What if there are 50 righteous, 40, 10? God listened, but the stakes were higher than Abraham knew. That very night, Sodom's wickedness reached its peak, and 2 angels dragged Lot and his family away as fire rained from heaven. Lot's wife looked back and turned to salt. The message was clear. God's judgment was real, but so was his mercy. Back in Abraham's camp, tension simmered. Sarah's pregnancy should have been a time of celebration, but Hagar and Ishmael, the son Abraham had with Sarah's servant, watched from the shadows. When Isaac was finally born, Sarah's laughter turned to triumph, but also to fear. This boy will not share the inheritance with mine, she demanded. Abraham's heart tore in two. How could he send his firstborn son away? But God confirmed Sarah's words. Isaac was the child of promise. With a heavy heart, Abraham gave Hagar and Ishmael bread and water and sent them into the wilderness. But the greatest test was yet to come. Years later, God's voice thundered in Abraham's spirit. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and sacrifice him. The words made no sense. Isaac, the promised child, had God brought him this far only to take it all away? That night, Abraham stared into the fire, his mind racing. Was this a test, a trick, or was faith truly about surrendering everything, even the dream he had waited a lifetime for? The knife was sharp, the wood was stacked, and Isaac, innocent and trusting, carried the load up the mountain himself. Father, where is the lamb for the offering? Abraham's reply was heavy with unspoken agony. God himself will provide. But deep down, he had no idea how this would end. Would he lose it all, or was there a greater plan hidden in the shadows? The answer would come, but not before Abraham faced the hardest moment of his life. The mountain loomed ahead, its rocky path cutting through the early morning mist. Abraham's hands trembled as he adjusted the bundle of firewood on Isaac's shoulders, wood meant for his own son's sacrifice. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of God's command pressing down like the stones beneath their feet. Isaac, still unaware, walked faithfully beside his father, his young voice breaking the silence. We have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering? Abraham's throat tightened. How could he explain the unexplainable? God will provide, my son. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. As they reached the summit, Abraham built the altar with slow, deliberate movements, each stone placed as if it might be the last thing he ever did for his child. Isaac watched, confusion turning to dawning horror, as his father bound his hands and laid him on the wood. The boy's eyes locked with Abraham's, searching, pleading. A father's love warred with divine obedience in that terrible moment. The knife glinted in the sunlight as Abraham raised it, his arms shaking not from weakness, but from the unbearable cost of faith. Somewhere in the distance, a ram stirred in the thicket, unseen. The wind carried the sound of rustling leaves, but Abraham didn't hear it. Not yet. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heart, the ragged breath of his son beneath him, and the deafening silence of heaven. Was this truly God's will? The knife hovered in the air. Time slowed. And in that breathless pause, the entire covenant, the promise of nations, the future of a people, hung by a thread. One movement, one cry, one divine intervention, or everything would be lost. The knife trembled in Abraham's grip, his muscles locked in agonizing hesitation. Just as his arms began their terrible descent, a voice, not from the heavens, but from behind him, shouted, "Stop!" Abraham whirled to see Sarah staggering up the mountainside, her robes torn from running, her face streaked with dust and tears. She must have followed them in secret, unable to bear not knowing how this would end. Now she threw herself between her husband and son, her body shielding Isaac. "Have you gone mad?" she screamed, her voice raw with betrayal. "This is our miracle child, the one we waited a lifetime for." Abraham's face crumpled. "God commanded it," he whispered, but Sarah shook her head wildly. "Then why would he give us a son just to take him away? What kind of God does that?" Her words hung in the air like a challenge, not just to Abraham, but to the divine itself. The wind grew still. Even the ram in the thicket froze, as if creation itself held its breath. Then from the swirling clouds above, the voice Abraham knew so well finally spoke. But the words were unexpected. "You were willing to surrender everything, but did you ever ask why?" The question landed like a blow. All these years, Abraham had obeyed without hesitation, leaving Ur, waiting decades for Isaac, even raising the knife. But now, for the first time, God seemed to want something more than blind faith. Understanding. Sarah's defiant stance, her refusal to accept the unthinkable, was this part of the test all along? Below the mountain, a commotion erupted. Servants shouted as a figure emerged from the tree line. Hagar, Ishmael's mother, her face gaunt from years in the wilderness. She pointed a shaking finger at Abraham. "You cast us out to die, but God heard my son's cries." Ishmael, now a young man, stood beside her, his eyes burning with unresolved hurt. The family Abraham had fractured was now converging on this sacred, terrible place, and none of them would leave without answers. The altar stood unfinished. The knife lay heavy in Abraham's hand, and the voice of God, when it came again, held a new intensity. "Now you see the cost of the covenant. The question is, are you ready to pay it?" But this time the question wasn't just for Abraham. Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, Ishmael, they all stared at him, waiting. The promise of nations depended on his next move, and whatever he chose would echo for generations. The mountain fell silent as Abraham dropped the knife. It clattered against the stones, the sound echoing like thunder in the heavy air. His hands, once steady in obedience, now shook with revelation. He looked at Sarah, her fierce love, her righteous anger. Then at Isaac, still bound on the altar, his young face streaked with silent tears. Finally, his gaze turned to Hagar and Ishmael, the family he had sent away, but who had returned at this pivotal moment. This was never just about sacrifice, and he realized. It was about the weight of the promise and who it was truly for. Then the voice of God came again, softer this time, but no less powerful. "Abraham, you have shown your faith, not by raising the knife, but by laying it down. Now look." A rustling came from the thicket, and there, its horns tangled in the branches, stood a ram, strong, unblemished, a perfect offering. Abraham's breath caught. God had provided. With trembling hands, he untied Isaac and embraced him, then turned to Sarah, pulling her close. But the test wasn't over yet. As Abraham moved toward the ram, Ishmael stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Father." The word hung between them, part accusation, part plea. Abraham froze, realizing the deeper lesson. The covenant wasn't just about Isaac, it was about all his descendants. The promises of nations, of blessings beyond measure, they included Ishmael too. Hagar's eyes met his, and in that moment, Abraham understood. His faith wasn't just about obedience to God, but about love for his family. With tears streaming down his face, Abraham did something he had never done before. He called both his sons to the altar. Together they sacrificed the ram, its blood sealing not just Abraham's devotion, but a new understanding. God's plan was bigger than one man, one son, one lineage. As the smoke rose into the sky, a final whisper came on the wind. Because you did not withhold even your heart, nations will rise from you, not just through Isaac, but through Ishmael too. But here's the twist no one expected. Years later, when Abraham died, both Isaac and Ishmael returned to bury him together. The brothers who had been torn apart by jealousy and fear stood side by side at their father's grave, a silent testament to the truth that God's promises are wider, deeper, and more surprising than anyone could imagine. The Father of nations had finally united them, but the story was only beginning. The morning sun rose over Mamre, casting golden light on the field where Abraham was laid to rest. Isaac and Ishmael stood together in silence, the years of separation finally bridged by their shared grief and their father's last wish. The two sons who had once been torn apart by circumstance now shared something deeper, the understanding that they were both part of a story much larger than themselves. As they piled stones over the grave, neither spoke of the past. There was no need. The ram on the mountain, the voice in the wilderness, the promises whispered through generations. They had all led here, to this moment of unexpected peace. Sarah lived many more years watching Isaac grow into the heir of God's covenant. But in her final days, she often thought of Hagar and Ishmael, wondering about the boys she had once sent away. She never saw them again, but she hoped somewhere in the deserts of Paran, they had found their own blessing. After all, God had said it himself. Ishmael, too, would father a great nation. The promise was never meant for just one line, one people. It was meant to spread like the stars Abraham had once counted, impossible to number, shining for all. As for Isaac, he carried his father's faith forward, but with a gentler wisdom. He remembered the knife, the fire, the terror on that mountain, but also the ram, the reprieve, the lesson that true obedience wasn't blind. When his own sons were born, he told them the story differently, not just as a test of Abraham's faith, but as a testament to God's mercy. He doesn't demand our destruction, Isaac would say. He asks for our trust and then provides the way. Generations later, the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael would clash, their strife echoing the old tensions of their fathers. But in those early days at Abraham's grave, there was a fleeting glimpse of what could have been, and perhaps what still could be. The legacy of the Father of Nations wasn't just in bloodlines or borders, but in the unshakable truth that God's promises endure, even when humans falter. And so the story ends where it began, under a sky full of stars, countless, endless. A reminder that faith, like family, is never just about one person. It's about the generations to come, and the hope that they might find their way back to each other. The covenant lived on. The journey wasn't over, but for now, in this quiet moment, it was enough.